So welcome, welcome. It's a pleasure to have all of you. I really look forward to sharing all the information that I've learned about type 6 and where the type 6 gets confused, and wanted you to hear from all three instincts. For those of you who don't know, my specialty is working with multiple typologies to better understand how to accurately type. And my journey to finding the Enneagram included having skills for profiling, with microexpressions, with faciology, many systems, body language, and a version of NLP. So I know a lot about the patterns of the way people move, look, gesture, hand gestures. And I found with sixes that there's more clenching of the hands, even if a little bit here. Like it's tiny, but that's a response to fear, is, closing off the jaw. So subtle things like that will show up with all of us, regardless of our type. But if we happen to be a 6, we'll always be identified with another type first, maybe even 2 or 3 types. And the reason for that is that the 6 identifies with a situation, not motivation. So the whole defense strategy of type 6 is based on adjusting to the conditions, the situation at hand, so that the organism, the ego, can survive. So if you look at these as biological imperatives, the 6 is the type on the Enneagram meant to evade detection, to be elusive, but to still track others and inconsistencies, which is why 6s can make great information gatherers. And they see themselves as investigative because they are, but they're investigating what they're curious about. They're investigating what they're suspicious about. But as a general rule, they're, unless it's their job to investigate, it's not the same way that 5s investigate. I really can't stress that enough. But what's important is that the 6 is focused on getting the information that'll keep them safe. If it means preparing for something that can go wrong, they prepare. If it's having people they can count on that know what they don't know, they're going to do that. So a lot of times, if they have a strong tritype, like the 684, the 648, or the 614, they're going to be more reactive, and you'll see a little more counterphobia. And if they have the sexual instinct, you'll see more counterphobia. Even if their self-pres sexual is really close, you'll see counterphobic behaviors. But the most important thing to understand about type 6 is that all 6s are phobic and all 6s are counterphobic. It's just to what degree. And if we look at fight, flight, and freeze, the self-pres 6 is more inclined to flee, to get out of a situation. And the sexual 6 is more inclined to have learned, and in a way rehearsed, and then fight back. And I'm talking verbally now, mentally. And a lot of times the 6 will do it in their mind, but not necessarily say it. And then the 3rd is the social, who gets caught between phobic and counterphobic. And they say, well, sometimes I'm phobic, sometimes I'm counterphobic, maybe I'm not a 6. But what all 6s do when they're first learning the Enneagram is they decide on their type based on their identification. So if they're good, if they're an introvert and good at math and are in the sciences, they think they're a 5. If they want peace and harmony, and that was a value in their family, they see themselves as 9s. And if they're spiritual, if they're helpful, which, by the way, the 6 is the most helpful type, more than type 2. It's like natural for a 6 to identify with the person in need of help. And if it's their person or persons, their family group, they're very helpful, unless there's some sort of estrangement. And that's another part of 6 we can talk about. So there are many, many things about type 6 I want to share with you. And I had the good fortune of attending Claudio Naranjo's 7-day intensive in 1996. And at that time, if you don't know, I gave him my research on the instincts, and he validated it and was actually pleased that I had proven his work. And I wasn't trying to prove or disprove his work. I was trying to just find out more about the instincts, because I knew there was a stacking pattern. And I knew the same was true with the types. And now that's why you'll hear me talk about what's your stacking order of your instincts, or your stacking order in your tritype. I want to know, because it shifts the patterns of attention, which are very, very meaningful to begin to interrupt what is the overthinking part of all types. But in the case of the type 6, it's really, really important. So think about, if you are a 6, think about the types you identified with first. And I'm going to have each person introduce themselves, the 5 panelists, and tell you about their journey. And you get the benefit of seeing a 6 couple as well, a double 6, and that's always fascinating too, to see the way people act. I want to start with Abdul. Abdul, will you give your name and where you are, and the how long you've known the Enneagram, and the types you thought you were before you landed on 6?
Thank you, Catherine. I'm delighted to be here with this large audience. My name is Abdul. I'm a therapist in Sydney, Australia. And I've been studying the Enneagram since 2014, initially reading Helen Palmer's book, I think the original one from '88. And for 3 years up until 2017, identified myself as a type 1 very, very strongly. And then working with Katherine in 2017, within that first coaching session, there was that huge shift when Katherine pointed out, I've got all the micro expressions and, you know, the fears of the 6. And that was a huge realignment for me, but it took me about a week. And then the 6, in particular, the social 6, really started to fit. And what I want to emphasize is that that's not just an intellectual exercise. Oh, I'm not a 1, I'm a 6. It had a profound impact upon me, because actually what it did is it helped me to reorganize all of my life experience from childhood up until my current age. It had a huge organizing impact, I think, at a neurological level, and everything started to come into place. And really, since then, it's been my mission, speaking like a social 1, the reformer, the mission to get as many 6s as possible in my own coaching practice to recognize that they're 6s, because I think it's such a tragedy that so many 6s don't see they're a 6. And if you don't see it, you really never land with the Enneagram. The system isn't really going to give its fruits to you. So for the first 3 years, thinking I was a 1, there was real no transformation for me. It was purely intellectual. But once I hit on the 6 and I hit on my tritype and my instinct, I can't emphasize enough, that's when the power of this system really manifested in my life. And I think that's been the most profound thing for me, learning the Enneagram. And it's not the only model I use in my own practice as a therapist, but it's really the core. It's what holds everything together for me, along with core energetics. But it's been so profound and such a gift. So that's my, I guess, journey or my testimony about the Enneagram from 1 to 6.
I think I'm going to break that out separately and put it, if you don't mind, because you just said the most profound truth for all of us. Until we land on our correct type, we could be running around the Tritype too, the system.
Yeah.
But once we land on our correct type, it's liberating. And I've seen it over and over and over again. And when you talk about tragedy, that's one of the things I was going to say, that Naranjo felt it was a tragedy that 6s didn't trust that they were 6s because they were missing the liberating aspects of understanding that the anxiety is a biological imperative. There's nothing wrong with you. You're meant to do it. Yeah. And he also felt that when people had been misinformed about the lines of connection and that you went one way positively and another way negatively, he thought that was the greatest tragedy of all, because it caused unnecessary suffering and misunderstandings about the Enneagram itself, so that there weren't just people mistyping that were 6s. There were people mistyping thinking, oh, when I'm unhappy, I'm like this type, so I'm that type. So yeah, thank you very much, Abdul. And thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Catherine. My pleasure.
For those of you who don't know, the way I do the panels is a teaching panel. So whatever the person says, I then weave in the why the type does that. And that's based on the tens of thousands of interviews and coaching sessions that I've done, where I've found out the internal experience of every Enneagram type. And that I've done since always, but formally since 1995. Kai and Yuen, can you introduce yourselves?
Hello.
Tell where you are and how long have you known the Enneagram?
Yep, I'm Kai. I'm Malaysian Chinese. I've learned the Enneagram since 2012 from the one and only Katherine Fauvre. And I started my Enneagram journey thinking I'm a 4 and thinking I'm a sexual instinct. And I've been running round and round the Enneagram, and it took me years to find my type, my Tritype, and my instinct. And it is truly liberating.
Yeah. Thank you, Kai. Yuen?
Yeah, at the same time, we know about Catherine's work. Yeah. Before we seriously attend Katherine class, we bought your material and thought we have figured out what Enneagram really is. So we try to type all our friends, about 40 of them, with the cards. And when we really, when we met you in person, then only I know we have used the card wrongly.
No, yeah, we have typed everyone wrong,
Yeah,
including ourselves.
Yep. I thought I'm a 1. I thought I'm a 136 probably. I would never thought, I'm leading with 6. So, but when I met you, and it's very clear that I think I'm a 6. How I behave, how you explain.
Tell them about the little hop that you did.
The micro expression and all the little gesture, I think is very obviously, 6 gesture. So
yeah. It's pretty obvious to once you just learn this much about micro expression, and then you can begin to see that some people are introverted and don't show their expressions, as vividly. I talk about the 6 with these movements. What? You kidding? No. Wait a minute. And just, I can only move one eyebrow, so I can't do them. But there are even videos from the Mother of Dragons where she does that. She makes her eyebrows do all kinds. And if you search on Google, you'll find it and see. And why is that so? It's because 6s, as they think, they access both sides of their brain and their hindbrain. They're fascinating. You're meant to be fascinating. You're the most complex of all 9 types. And that's why you mistype as well. And the whole defense strategy is built on eluding and avoiding danger. So 6s don't want to typecast themselves. They don't want to choose a type unless it's the positive qualities of a type that they do well. And it could be a type in their tritype, by the way. But so I spent a lot of money and a lot of time because I absolutely adore 6s, but I hate the suffering of the long term not knowing they're 6. And I had them involved over and over and over again as I'd modify the cards in my initial set of cards 25 years ago. And I'd give it to 6s, and then 6s wouldn't choose their card. And I said, well, based on the card you chose and based on this card, which would be the 6 card, which adjectives don't apply to you on the 6 card and which don't apply to you on the card you chose? And they'd look at it and they'd say, oh, well, all the words on the 6 card, because they wouldn't know it was a 6 card, they actually all apply to me. And I said, how about on the card you chose? Well, 3 of them do. And that's when I only had 5 words. And I said, well, so why didn't you choose the card that had 5 words? Since you were supposed to choose the card that was true of you most of your life, most of the time. And so many 6s answered, well, it depends on the situation. I can be this way too, and this can be stronger than those 5 words. So understanding that the 6 is meant to do that is really important. And I would even change the card, make these, and then give the same person the cards again, because they might say, oh, if it just had this word on it, I would have chosen it. And I go put that word on. They still choose a card that isn't the one they said they'd choose. So it's just part of the way 6 is meant to think of the conditions of the moment and how they feel in the moment. 6s will also take the test many times. So what you're saying is very accurate. Thank you, Kainue. It really, really is so true. And I'm hoping that in this video series that people will begin to understand the motivations and the deeper suffering of each type so that they can land with the correct type. And we laugh about 6s and we laugh about all the types, but underneath it is a very important pain that we're going to get to. But Aida, when did you learn about the Enneagram? And were you ever mistyped?
Well, you taught me, and you told me I was a 6, and you explained why, because I was struggling with the Helen Palmer stuff because it was way too technical for me. And I was like, what does that mean? So the way you explained it to me was the way I could learn. So then I really got it. And actually, after that, I never questioned anything because it just resonated.
Do you remember what resonated?
You know what? I don't know the exact words that you used, but it just made sense. And I don't think I even questioned it once I learned it. Because it just felt like, well, yeah, they're tough, but they're also weak. And I feel that way on the inside too. So I really understood that part. I think I read something and it probably was Helen's book, so that's why I didn't understand it before you. And I was like, oh, maybe I'm a 7. I didn't know. So I didn't understand it.
The first thing that I introduced you to was before the books, and it was Kathy Spieth's notes, what she taught. And if you, those of you who don't know Kathy Spieth in this process, the only reason we're all sitting here now discussing it is that she didn't sign a confidentiality agreement with Claudio Naranjo for the Seekers After Truth group because she was his girlfriend at the time. So when he stopped doing the SAT groups in Berkeley, which he did for 18 months, so everything that we're getting came from those 18 months, from 71 to part of 73. And people don't realize that. And that's why he said he didn't publish on the subtypes, because he hadn't been focused on them. And he liked my work because I added in so many variables that he hadn't recognized yet, and that he wanted me to publish his view of the 27 instincts, which I did. I included it in my book. And now I realize that everybody doesn't have that. So I'm putting it back in to my book the way it used to be with the updated version. I hope to have that out in the next month or two. It's just being edited right now. But yeah, it is important to see what came from what teacher and when, and what was important at the time. So I basically, when I found the Enneagram, everyone in my life had to know the Enneagram. Like Kai and Yuen said, they typed 40 people. I, even for my certification, I was supposed to type 10 people and videotape it. Well, I typed over 500 people. I wanted to know what people were. And so I just, anyone in my life, they learned the Enneagram whether they wanted to or not. So thank you. Erin.
Hi, I'm Erin Adonisio, and I'm from Norman, Oklahoma. I have known about the Enneagram since 2000, so it's been 20 years now. When I first discovered it, I was in high school, and I found a book at the bookstore, and my best friend and I started reading it. And before I knew the system at all, superficially, I thought I was a 2. So I didn't get very far into the book, and I was like, oh, I must be a 2 because I'm helpful. So of course, you know, behavior, but I wasn't understanding it at the time. So it wasn't long until my friend was like, you really should read more of these types, because I just read about the 6 and it sounds exactly like you. And I was like, I really don't think so. I think I figured it out, but that's okay. And he finally convinced me to read it, and I was reluctantly agreed that was me. So ever since I've known, so for, 19 years and several months, I've known I'm a 6. And it wasn't, I think it was about 8 years later, I met Katherine at a conference, at the IEA conference, and I went to her Tritype presentation. And so I knew I was a 6, but we had like a little group where we were kind of supposed to talk about what we thought our Tritype might be. And I assumed I had 2 in my Tritype, because if I thought I was a 2 originally, I must have 2 in my Tritype. And everyone was like, you're really helpful. You seem nice. You probably have 2. So I was like, okay, I definitely have 2. And I thought I probably had 1. And after, working with Katherine a little bit, she was like, why not 4? And when I went back and looked at my original test results, I had gotten 614. So ever since then, I've pretty much known, and I really, it really fits, and It makes a lot of sense.
Thank you, Erin. Many 6s mistype as 2s because of that helpfulness. And the way you can see the difference in the helpfulness is that the 6 always wants to help their friends. or the people that they're connected to. Whereas the 2 wants to help everyone and wants to phrase things well, be kind in their word choices. Now, both the 2 and the 6 are thoughtful, but 2s being an image type, think a little bit about what they're going to say. And the 6s are more spontaneous. They're head type, so it's spinning in their head all these possibilities, and not just negative ones. They get hooked on the negative possibility because that's what they need to prepare for, the worst case scenario. But there's a type of camaraderie that 6s want and try to create in their lives. They need that best friend, or they need that person that they feel like they can go through life with, so that they feel safe in the world. And occasionally 6s will be true loners, but that's when they have access to whatever they perceive they need, or if they're the really antisocial 6, which in this case hasn't been true. Promise to always read the paragraph. 6s believe that the world contains many hazards and is inherently unreliable. This is what I have to emphasize the most, is 6s are tracking who and what is dependable and reliable, and then how they need to be dependable and reliable, and to whom. They are vigilant, have questioning minds, and seek certainty to gain security. The questioning mind of the 6 is to always, well, wait, you said this last time. Or I noticed that person said different things to different people. What does that mean? And it is the job of the 6 to do that. So they become more vigilant. Once someone's on their radar, I always tease the 6s, if, they're basically trusting, but when someone comes on their radar, something's inconsistent, then the 6 is like, I'm watching you, without telling the person, but all of a sudden their need for answers is triggered, and they start asking other people about someone they feel is questionable, or they search things to prove to themselves one way or another if someone's potentially unreliable or dangerous, or emotionally or mentally. Could say something about them, accuse them of something, blame them for something. It's a really important distinction with 6, is they question to get answers, to calm down their nervous system. And the 6s dislike rapid change and unpredictability. They want to know what's what. And if they have to suddenly change everything, that throws many variables out there that they may not know how to deal with. So they like advanced notice and time to integrate new things. And that's how the 6 and 7 are different, is the 7 wants the spontaneous change. They don't want the change put on them, but they are going to initiate change all the time. Whereas the 6, it's like, I've got that part taken care of. And they're going to want to add in only changes that they can easily integrate, and one at a time. They also are attracted to clear structures. They want to know exactly the way things should be. And this varies with the Tritype too, how that structure needs to be. So the 1-3-6 Tritype, 6 in the lead, really wants everything in a structure. And they're very good at creating structure and following through and systematizing things. But they also like the noble cause. That's why the 6 has the dichotomy of the hero and the coward, courageous or cowardly. And it's because the 6 is always afraid they'll be a coward. But the other types, the other 8 types, kind of know they could be a coward given certain circumstances, but they're not trying to check out whether they'd be a coward. I never thought of it in my life, whether I would be a coward or not. But if you're afraid you won't react quickly enough with the right answer, then it's distressing. Think of how many times, if you're a 6, how many times you wish you had said something in an exchange, but at the time there was a little bit of a freeze going on and you couldn't think of that sentence that would have cleared things up immediately or put you in a position of not being blamed for something you didn't do or understood because you noticed something. And the noble cause is because the 6 identifies with the underdog. If they see someone mistreated, they feel like they know what that's like, and they'll band together with others to help out and protect people that are mistreated or going through a really tough situation. And they also like rational analysis, especially 6s that have the TJ function in Myers-Briggs. And they like taking calculated risks. So even the most counter-phobic 6 that is a proof junkie and a risk junkie, they still have calculated what can go wrong before they do it. So it's fascinating to look at the way these different types play out and what the 6 needs. But if each of you could think of what you identify most with what I'm saying, is it the reliability, the unpredictability, the noble cause, or wanting clear structures? And what is it you bring to any given situation? Abdul?
Can I just quickly say for the audience that, and this is my 6 brain anticipating, in case people think Katherine is, the guru and we just accept that she said we're a 6 and we say yes. But really when the 6 gets it that they're a 6, it's an affective experience. It's an inner knowing that's triggered. It's not intellectual. Oh, Catherine's the Enneagram expert and she said I'm a 6, so I must be. So whenever the 6 lands on their type, there's going to be an emotional shift and an inner knowing. So I just want to make that clear. This isn't an intellectual exercise. Well, what I identify with in what you've listed is very much the need for structure, predictability, and certainty. And part of the reason why the 6 was veiled from me is in my Tritype with 1 and 3. I guess the 1 and 3 pick up the slack and immediately are coming online, and the 1 is in my gut, which is really close, my 6 and 1. So as soon as my fear is activated, my gut comes online. So that's why I felt it can't be a 6, because I'm very certain I've got gut instincts, which I do, but it's starting in the head. I'm calculating, I'm thinking what needs to be done. And then the 3 comes online, which, wants to do a top job, wants to be efficient, wants to, in a way, shine. So the 6 was in a way veiled, but what I can clearly see is that it clearly is the CEO. It's in charge of the personality because I'm tracking for what's needed, what could go wrong, what's expected of me. And in particular, when it comes to authority figures for me,
Yes, thank you. Go into that.
Yeah,
Say
it isn't
more
just
about
me submitting to an authority figure. I'm looking throughout my whole life, whether it's a teacher or when I was employed, a boss. What's this person saying? Do they know what they're saying? Can I trust them? What's the inconsistency? And sometimes I'd get into trouble because I'd speak my mind. When I was a young therapist working at a hospital, I challenged a psychiatrist's diagnosis, and I was like 24 years old, straight out of college. I'm back in his office, and he had a particular personality, a particular flavor to his personality, let's say. And but I dug my heels in. But you better bet physiologically, I was that little boy again at the principal's office, but the physiological arousal, and until I learned that I was a 6, I couldn't really get that. What was happening for me internally, although you can't really see it externally, I think, and perhaps my Tritype contributes to that. But there's this massive surge. Yeah. So they're sort of my thoughts on that, and how the Tritype can perhaps hide the more apparent features of the 6.
It can indeed. That's a great observation and very important to understand. And with Tritype, it's when I first conceived of that concept, it's because I was interviewing, and it got to be thousands of people. And I noticed that people had the core fears of 3 types, not just one. And at first I could kind of say, well, it's a line of connection, it's a wing, but there were a whole bunch of people that they had no access to to having the core fears of the type. And yet most people kind of know they're Tritype once they understand the core fears, because they're always that way. And I mentioned earlier that the one in the Tritype can make the 6 more counter-phobic. And the problem with the social is like, should I be phobic or counter-phobic? Okay, this is a situation where I have to be counter-phobic. But the very fact that you mentioned what it felt like inside, the 6 has to puff up, steel up to be assertive or practice. They have to be so used to doing that they can overdo it or do it in a way too much, too quickly. But then afterwards, it's like, oh boy, that was tough. I can't believe I did that. Can you believe that? There's a need to process. Whereas when the 6 is choosing between being an 8 or 1, the difference is the 8 doesn't have to puff up. The 8's already said that thing that they probably shouldn't have said. Whoops. When 6 is counterphobic, and an 8 can seem very similar in the moment of assertion. The main difference is that the 6 energetically has to hold that place. You mentioned core energetics. Whereas the 8 gets more nonchalant, unless it's a like in your face conflict. The 8 is, oh really? And it's more of a, you want to take me on? Are you sure about that? Whereas the 6 is like gotten revved up, and both will describe themselves as strong. But the 8 doesn't realize they're weak because it's out of their consciousness. Their defense strategy finds weakness pathetic. So you're giving a great example of what happens with 6, 1, and 3, because the 1 and 3 are industrious, can-do types that, do what they should. The 1's doing what they should do, and the 3's doing what they should do to be the best. And that makes the 6 seem more 1-ish, for sure. And then social. Common mistyping are people that are social that identify with 1, and they're not 1s, they're actually 6s. Thank you, Abdul. Aida, so what do you relate to, the need for reliability or being reliable, or do you see yourself especially as the sexual 6? The 639 is that the primary type in each center. So they always want things to work out quickly, and they want balance, and they're designed to seek balance. The wing type of each center type is showing the 2 extremes, and so the 5 is the fear paranoid type. That's, as Ichazo described, your head center is what you need to know to survive, to prevail. If you needed to learn how to hunt, you either have to befriend someone like a social 6 or 7, join a group the way a social 7 would, or become the knower hide and watch someone hunting to see what they do. But if you look at it on a primitive level, whatever your head type is, it's how you go about answering questions that are confusing to you or that you want to know the answer to. And generally, you're going to try and get a lot of information. But Aida, as a sexual 6, you have like the softest tritype of 6, with the exception of the 629. But you're sexual. So how does your counter-phobia show up? And how do you see the way you'll do something noble, even if it means you'll have to deal with negativity with others?
Oh, well, I do always want to stick up for somebody who's being wronged. I don't care if they're in my family or not. So I do that, and sometimes I make waves, and that's okay. But I tend to do that individually, not with a group. So I might help someone that I see on the street, that I see a lot. She might come in and say hi to me on my studio. I would help that person because she was mentally ill, homeless, but I would help her all the time. But I don't do it for like the grand group of things. I don't do that. So I pick and choose who I want to help. What else did I?
Yeah, no, that's very indicative of the sexual 6. It's the sexual 6 can't stand to see someone helpless or not having what they need, but they're less inclined to be in a group situation to help people. They're less inclined to be in a charity, for example. But if they see someone, they can choose on their own to help whomever they want as they want. Not that you couldn't ask a sexual 6, hey, we're trying to raise money, or can you do this to help out? And if they liked the person, most sexual 6s would say yes. Mm-hmm. They might be anxious about what they had to do, but yeah. And so the noble cause is really the calling for the 6. When they feel that need for nobility, not in others, but in themselves, that a situation calls for them to not evade, but to speak out, then the 6 is in courage. They're in their courageousness. And when they're evading, and people kind of don't like it, the 6 is often trying to avoid a conflict or not make the person feel bad, or tell them let them off easy. But other people can pick up on it. Have you ever had that experience, Aida, where you want to say something, but you know it'll hurt their feelings, so you say something softly, and then they don't get it, and then it creates this double bind that you have to continue to do something. A hint. It's 6s will hint at things rather than say what they feel. And then when someone doesn't get it, what do you do? When you want them to get it.
It can be a little bit too direct.
Yeah.
It's like I kind of just and it sounds a little bit harsh. Especially when I'm older now. When I was younger, I was afraid to do any of that. But older, there's a part of me that doesn't care. Not that I don't care about the person or anything, but it's like, I just have to, how do I say it right? I just feel I want to be more direct, but still kind.
Yes. Yes. And a lot
to get the point across instead of like pussyfooting around it.
Yeah.
So.
A lot of 6s have trouble with their relationships because they do that. And it's because the other people don't realize that 6s just would rather avoid it because they don't want to be falsely blamed for something. There's a very real reason that they do it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I find that when the 6 does say something, it is kind of abrupt because the
Yes.
6 has to power up, has to puff up to say it.
The conversation might be really sweet and kind, but then they won't get it. And then I have to come in and get it and just do it, and be more direct.
And I would venture to guess it is because you care.
Yes, always. Not because I want to be a mean person, but I can be that too. It can come across mean at times. So.
Because it's abrupt?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of times when 6s finally say something, it seems mean, but they've just gotten the courage to say it. And it's not it doesn't flow easily. And often the 639 will type as a 2 as well, or believe they have 2 in the Tritype, and then it just takes a while for them to realize how important prestige is. What do you relate to? The reliability? What's your reaction to the noble cause, structured circumstances? Like you happen to have a Tritype that's the least structured, the 648. So I'm,
Yes.
but having said that, all 6s want to know the parameters so they won't be blamed for something or get in trouble for doing something. Because that's what's the most unnerving to a 6, is being blamed or blameworthy. Oh, I know what you can help me with too, is the way the 6, in an attempt to avoid blame, will accuse others that were untrustworthy. Accusation, like Naranjo talked about, this relationship between blame and accusation. And that the 6 is always trying to avoid being blamed for something they didn't do, or even something they did do, but when they're younger, as in elementary school, they wouldn't want to get in trouble for having done that. So they will put the blame elsewhere as a child. But as an adult, it'll go to the person who's the most suspicious. Do you relate to that at all?
Yes, I do. I think I project most of my blame onto authority figures, governments, and people in leadership roles, and even spiritual gurus.
Yes, of course. And do you remember as a child trying to avoid blame and being really nervous if you thought you could get in trouble for doing something, that you could be found out, is really what I'm referring to?
Yeah, my favorite line is, "I didn't do it."
Yeah. Even when you had chocolate all over your face, you didn't eat the chocolate cookies?
Yeah, even if I didn't do it, I would still say I didn't do it.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. How about you, Wen? You have 6, 1, and 4, and you're self-pres. So what do you relate to about the noble cause, your relationship to blame and accusation, and structured ways of learning things or doing things or knowing what that structure is?
Yeah, everything that you said about 6 earlier, I totally can identify all of them, because it all depends.
It all depends.
So like how I couldn't find my type is because what I should do, because especially 6 are good follower and we do what we are told. So in our culture, probably told us that, you should be responsible, do good and, achieving. So that is the reason that I couldn't find my type. So
And that's also Chinese culture. Is it Malaysian culture as well?
yeah, I think our parents talk about success all the time. They are,
Even if they have none.
even if they are not a free, but that is in the culture.
Yeah,
so
that's the Chinese culture. It's
Yeah.
very, very, very 3.
So I spent probably 2 years, thought that I had 3 in Tritype. So especially for 6, we will identify what our role is or what we're supposed to do. So it's really confusing at the beginning. So like all the structure things, I thought I am 613, probably because my over identification with the 1, I need structure all the time. Plan out all the time. And the 6 will execute the structure. And so it kind of like made the 4 not that obvious. But
exactly. And when you have such a strong cultural overlay, like we do in the US, we have the 3, 7, and 1. The 1 is the founding fathers and our bills. Well, some of the Bill of Rights were very 7-ish, but the governmental structures are very 1-ish in the US. But when we look at the captains and kings of industry and what the US was built on, and that was adventurous people that were willing to cross the ocean, start a new life. And we're really a country of immigrants for the most part. Everyone's from somewhere else. So we just have that mentality of having the 3-ish overlay too. And I find it's very hard for people to see their 6 because we have a culture that says, yeah, can't be afraid. So when you have a 3 over culture from your country or culture that you're in, it could be subcultures too, then you have to dismiss a part of yourself that is not okay to be afraid. You need to be the higher values of your country. So I've found that once a 6 discovers they have 4, they understand their fierceness, because when 6 and 4 come together, it brings double doubt, but it also brings more of a visceral assertion when needed. And obviously the 4-6-8 tritype is the most emotionally reactive because it's the visceral type in each center. So that's why they're the truth teller, the reactive personality. So when the 6 finally feels like they've had enough or truth needs to be spoken, the 4-6-8 is going to do it the fastest. And then also the 4-6-1. So the 6 leading that tritype just needs to know that this is one of those moments, and then they take the risk. So it's calculated risk taking, speaking up, and it kind of shocks people sometimes, especially if the 6 is an introvert. But because the 6 is naturally friendly and offering you things, oh, you want some water? Oh, here, do you need this? They're amazing with their friends and family that they don't notice that they have to really see a wrongdoing that they can't take anymore. It feels physical when they can't take it, so they speak out. It's also like every 6 is an individual, and you have to look at the history of the 6 to see how exactly it's going to show up. But 6s are identified with being afraid they're not smart enough. And even if they were valedictorian of their class, they're still afraid of what they don't know. And so they make sure that they have people to count on, to go to. And if everything failed, let me go to you, Erin. Like, how do you relate to that question of who you count on, even though you're a very independent 6, and 6-4-1s with ISFJ actually are also quite, they keep their world small. Self-pres 6s want to be able to manage their world, so they keep it small. They're intimate small. Erin?
I have what I would say, like one, best friend, and he's kind of like my person. And so, I tell him everything, he tells me everything. And, he's kind of my person. Like when I feel like I have to check with someone, he's the one that I check with because, I've known him for decades and, we have an established trust. So like I trust his judgment and I know that he's looking out for my best interest. I don't have to question his intentions. So I would never ask for someone's advice that, I don't have that kind of history with because, I wouldn't know for sure if I could trust that they're looking out for me. So he's kind of like the person that I go to, with confidences or dilemmas or anything like that.
So so he's every kind of backup for you.
Yeah. I mean, I really, sometimes we all have to go back to our mom. So mom is there. My mom's an 8, so I trust her a lot. And then you're my other person. So that's kind of my 4 and my 2 8s are my little circle, and that's kind of all I need.
Yeah, thank you. That is true. 6s that are social could maybe have an extended group, a big band of connections or interconnectedness. Or not. I mean, it always depends on whether you're introverted or not, because you are introverted and you have the same tritype as UN. So there's more reserve. And like you didn't see your 4 either. I had to bring it to your attention because you identified, as you mentioned, with the 2, and you are helpful and you're extraordinary. And I hold you very dear, not just someone who administrates what I can't do, but also as a person. So there is a way that the 6 kind of links up. I want to go back to Aida because you don't look as frozen now. How do you have that security? How do you determine who's your backup so that you can feel like you can manage what's going on in life?
Well, you're my backup, period. Because Catherine's my best friend.
Yeah.
And we've known each other since we were in our 20s. But yeah, you're my backup. There's no one else. There is another person I'm uber close to, but she just happens to be my niece. And but yeah, they're in my inner circle, period. No one else touches them. No one. So
and that's the sexual instinct, that the twinship where you find the person. And it could be, you could also have, be married or have a girlfriend or a boyfriend, and you still need this person if you're sexual that is like this, and it has to be mutual to the sexual type, and in this case the subtype of 6. And that's why you'll see strength and beauty attached to sexual 6. There's a need to be beautiful to be safe and strong to be safe. And originally it was men that would act strong or be really competent. And then there was the rise of the smart male, and the smart became a strength. And with women, initially, when this was first conceived of 50 years ago, the beginnings of it, the female, did things to her appearance to be beautiful, to hide the fear. Because the desire, we have to look at the instinct, and the instinct is desiring this union and connection. And the 6 is the core fears of being, a problem, of being afraid. But this sexual part of the 6 is afraid of being an undesirable person to your best friend, to your partner, to your boyfriend or girlfriend. Can you speak on that, Aida? The strength and beauty part? Especially with 3 in the chart.
I know there. Well, as far as the person that I hate letting down would be Katherine the most. I hate it when if I hurt her or I let her down, it destroys me inside. If I let my family down, that's okay. But it's again, it's the instinctual connection. It's the instinctual sexual subtype, and she and I are both that. So that will destroy me, to tell you the truth. But no one else, not so much, except for my niece. But
do you remember younger, like having what you wore, or like 1/6 said to me that she was really scared to go to her reunion, and she's sexual 6. She was very nervous, but 6s are always nervous about change, apprehension about not knowing how things are going to play out. And she then just put on her high heels and put on her lipstick and felt strong enough to go in and meet it.
Well, I always felt that way. I always felt, oh, put my high heels on and I feel powerful.
Yeah, that's exactly the way.
Not so much anymore, but
well, you can take off
maybe a little. Maybe a little.
Yeah. And this is very true of sexual 6. It's there's a way in which the sexual feels they have to do something to power up. And what Naranjo noticed more than anything else was the female 6s tending to the way they look. So they could look like 3s to people. But it was the 6 knows they're hiding. And then he knows the men would be in sports or bulk up but they'd be a little too overreactive to be like an 8. And that's how he really began to see the counter-phobic 6 49 years ago. So he had shared that with me.
Wow.
I really get that. Part of 6 that is how you blame others. And it's very hard for 6 to see it because the 6 is more organized against not being blamed. But other people don't quite understand what's hurting inside the 6 when they go to an accusation, which they may not even mean as much as they intend, and what it's protecting the 6 from. So can any of you share what it's like when you feel on the spot and that you are afraid you made a mistake? And other than saying I didn't do it, is there an emotion that's going on before you automatically say I didn't do it or divert the attention to someone else? Or speak on the way you were suspicious when you were younger or didn't know the Enneagram. That would be good. Abdul, do you relate to that at all?
Yes, I do. I think deep down for me, reflecting on this question about the 6 and blame, is I see in my experience and in working with clients, there's a very soft and innocent part of the 6.
Oh, yes.
That desperately wants to stay in connection and rapport with the other. And we want to know that things are okay, we're okay. And that if, like in my case, if I've done something wrong, I think I'm willing to admit it. In fact, probably when I was younger, too willing, submitting too early. And I've learned, growing up and all my experiences is not to let that automatic defense take over and to say, well, let's talk about this or what's happening, and really being aware of the importance of intentions. Because intention is everything, right? I mean, if your intention is misunderstood, and I think that's the real core fear for me, and I think for many 6s, is our intentions being misunderstood.
Absolutely.
The person just focusing on the behavior, and the fear for the 6s will be persecuted for it.
Thank you. Absolutely.
Right?
In fact,
if we could explain the intention, then the hope is the other person has enough magnanimity or mercy or intelligence that we can deal with this.
Yes. You said it beautifully, because the 6 has a dichotomy of being naive and gullible, the innocent part of them, and being hardened and cynical. And the hardening, cynical part grows over time when their trust has been violated. Or that they've been taught to be cynical. Because again, the 6 is trying to know the way of the world and how to be in the world. So if they had imprinting from teachers, friends, family that said, don't trust anybody, it's really hard then to have trust. But if you ask a 6 a question, most of the time they'll just answer honestly. But if they're afraid in any way, there's an ulterior motive, they evade. And then the problems start to build, because once you haven't told the truth, the 6 doesn't know how to navigate that. And eventually they can't take it and blurt something out. Ichazo saw the 6 as the most deceptive, and for that reason, to not be blamed. And Naranjo saw the 3 as the most self-deceptive by wearing a mask, like hiding their true feelings so they won't be considered less than, so they could be more ideal and be their best. But it's certainly true for both. And if you have 6 and 3 in your tritype, there's a greater tendency, and social, there's a greater tendency to have a mask that keeps you safe. In fact, you can have more than one mask. Yeah. And it's human nature to have a mask. We all have a mask. But how would you describe the way you move between prudence? Like 6s have a lot of prudence. They're trying to do what's logical and safe, but their emotions then get in the way, and then they act as if. But it's not a real act as if, so they can't hold it. And you give a great example of underneath being anxious and nervous and feeling the biological sensations. Ichazo had dichotomies for all the types. And the 6 is caught between this dichotomy of pushing for what they believe in and then surrender, which is like collapse. And that moment to push and that moment to surrender is like on a
continuum.
Thank you. And when do you know when to push and when to submit? Submission was right, but he changed it to surrender because 6s didn't like the word submit.
I'd say when I was younger, probably a lot more submission in the face of authority, and growing up with a very strong self-pressed 268 mum, and being the sort of good little sort of social 6.
Yeah, the social 6, the good little boy. Yeah.
The submission. But now, as a grown-up, hopefully, I still submit, but more strategically. I submit when I can see, look, the person doesn't have the emotional intelligence and it's just too big a battle. So I'll let it go. But I see that more as a noble, magnanimous submission, not I've been intimidated and I'm a little kid. It's like, okay, we can let that go, no worries. The physiological overwhelm no longer overtakes me. I've got more of my inner authority, the inner knowing now. And I can read the other person and in a way have that empathy for them, that they're in a place where they can't extend grace. They can't hear me. And what's heartbreaking for me as a therapist is when I'm working with young 6s and the people in their lives, authority figures, teachers, parents, haven't extended that grace to the young 6. And in some cases, it's led this young 6 to the point of psychosis. They've literally had a psychotic break because from one misunderstanding, one thing, and then the school system and the principal, and It's like, and then this kid's being diagnosed with schizophrenia. It's like, oh my God, there are 6.
Yeah.
They just needed someone to say, hey, it's okay. In fact, it happened this morning with my son, who's a 6. He's 7, and he has a Rubik's Cube from a friend, and he undid all the pieces because he wanted to surprise his friend and reconfigure it in a way. And I could see he was distressed because all the pieces were there. And I said to him, I said, Arif, what's wrong? He said, I'm scared. I said, what are you scared of? He said, I'm not going to be able to put it together in time on Monday, and the friend is going to tell the office that I'm going to get into trouble. And you see the innocence of the 6. That's the core.
It goes so far. I mean, it went
So
from the
far.
friend to the principal.
Yeah, the friend's going to, and so he needed the words of reassurance. He needed the eye contact. It's like, hey, I'm on your team. It's okay. What do you think is going to happen? And the 6 calms down. It's like, it's not that hard. It's not that hard.
Yeah, a benevolent influence for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that, because it's so true. A great example.
Yeah.
Pi and Yuen, you're social and self-pres, but can you speak to that as well?
I think the blame part is very sophisticated how we deal with it. Because whenever we sense the danger that someone is going to point out, as I feel that is my Tritype, that what I am not perfect or proper enough, I will, before the person even say the harsh word, I will try to explain myself.
Oh, thank you. You're bringing up the most important thing. The 6 is explaining everything or over explaining. Thank you.
So just to probably, to clear out the situation, make sure that there's no misunderstanding, or sometimes to cover out my lack of courage, or, things that I really don't want to do, but I don't want to say it upfront. So I think it can be sneaky.
Yes.
So,
yes, in fact, the 6 is considered the sneakiest type. But you're being sneaky to try and figure out what you need to know to be safe. It's complicated.
yeah. And like finding all the reliable resource also is very true. That like Aida is finding the sexual, safety with you. So for self-pres 6, I find it in almost everything. Like if I have a doctor, I make sure I have the best doctor, even if I want to pay a lot, but that is the person that I go to. And if I need anything, I make sure I have the right person to go to. So,
many 6s have taught me that. Or someone who knows the right person to get maybe what you don't know.
Yes, yeah, that's true. So whenever all the 6s have conversation, we will sort of like pulling all our resources. You know what? My doctor is really good. But another 6 will say, you know what? I think this doctor is even better. So we constantly like to see which authority is better and which we should really go to, kind of this kind of.
So you're always tracking that. Yeah.
So
thank you. And I think probably with the 1 and 4, you're also focused on what is correct. Like the 614 wants to know what is correct. So if you don't know what's correct, then you would experience more shame.
Yeah.
Having 4 in there brings a defense of shame higher than if you have 3. There's a better way to kind of disguise the self, whereas the 4 wants to have a more elite perception of themselves. So when it's in the Tritype, it's influencing the lead type. The lead type is still in charge, of course. but you both have 4, but where you are differ is between the 8 and the 1. And I find with people that in couples that they tend to quarrel in the areas where they're different from one another. Because if we're the same, especially if we have the same instinct, we kind of see things in a similar way and can talk about them or work them out. But if someone is totally different lead type, tri-type, the reverse of the instincts, then there's more translating that needs to go on. And it doesn't matter what type we are, that will be true. So thank you. Erin?
Yeah, I kind of want to try to tie together like the structure and the blame. So I think for me, like structure is very important in my life, and learning systems has always been a way for me to kind of create structure and to have something predictable that kind of allows me to sort through the world. And so structures of information, particularly structures that explain people, so, you know, the Enneagram, energetic structures, you know, anything that kind of helps me to kind of frame things, it reduces my anxiety and fear. And it gives me more information about where people are coming from. And, you know, even if their behavior is disturbing to me or frightening or upsetting, I can put it into perspective by calling on those structures to help me understand where they're coming from. And so that helps me manage chaos, which is something that I need or my anxiety gets out of control.
That was my next question, so you can include that in what you said.
Okay. Yeah. Managing chaos is like a number 1 for me. I can't handle chaos. So I have to have structure. And I think also being correct and accurate with everything helps me to do that. And then that's kind of where the blame piece comes in, because I kind of feel like, you know, if I'm accurate, if I'm correct, if I'm careful, and I use ethics and integrity to navigate my life, then it's really hard to make, you know, devastating mistakes or to do something that someone could blame you for. And of course, everybody makes mistakes, but, you know, I'm trying to minimize the risk and keep everything calm and smooth. And so, you know, despite my efforts, obviously there's still chaos and mistakes. But I think that's where I feel like, you know, I can reduce the area where blame could occur. And that's kind of where the 1 comes in. Because, you know, meaning is very important to me as well. Meaning and beauty are also important, but amongst that, you know, just the accuracy, I feel like will reduce the window of blame. And so when I am blamed or I feel like someone's blaming me, whether, you know, I made the mistake or not, I feel kind of like that heat of, for me, it's probably just anger. I am quick to anger. But it's really...
But what angers you? And do you feel it from your gut coming up and then out of your mouth? Like,
yes.
That's the heat that the 1 is always feeling and trying to stop. But the 6 holds back so long that sometimes it just comes through.
Yeah, that's when this stuff kind of just comes out. But I think really what it is I'm hurt and I'm disappointed, and there's probably shame there, that I've made a mistake. I miscalculated. I was missing information. I did something wrong. What did I do? And whatever it is, I have to repair that, because if I can't fix it this time, I might make the mistake again and something worse could happen. So like Yuen said, it is feeling this need to be perfect, but more of like an internal kind of like perfection, like handling everything correctly and doing things correctly so that I don't hurt people or make mistakes that could have disastrous consequences.
Yeah. And do you feel that it works to have a mind over matter to develop that, to calm the anxiety? Because the anxiety is meant to be there for sixes. It's like if you don't have anxiety, you're just a really counter-phobic six that has shut it down. And maybe you've learned mind over matter. But otherwise, even the counter-phobic six that has had special ops training can go back and sense, yeah, I felt off or I felt reactive. Because the six, when it builds up, it's got a discharge. And that's when the six either needs to leave or they say something back. And sometimes the six will make a mistake of thinking someone was trying to do something because they did go to the worst case scenario and project it on. Projection is what sixes in general tend to do. They project out what the other person's ulterior motives might be, and they defend against it. But maybe that person didn't have those ulterior motives. And the six is still coming from their projection. Can you say anything about how to explain how you can know the difference? I think a lot of sixes want to know for sure mind over matter to calm the anxiety and not say things they shouldn't. But also that projecting and then it isn't the person actually feeling that way, but they've done things that raised your suspicion.
Yeah. It's definitely a fine calculation that I've had to work on over time. And of course, I still mess it up sometimes. So I definitely am prone to going more toward being suspicious first. But whereas I used to just go right into like accusation or blame the other person, like, what are you doing? You know, why are you saying this? This is what you're, trying to blame this on me. Now I can kind of wait. So I usually just try to make myself wait and to clarify the situation. And sometimes that requires me being more vulnerable than I would like to be, but saying to the person, I'm kind of hearing what you're saying as this. And like, is that the case? Is that how you're feeling? And waiting for the situation to be equal to the anger or fear that's rising. And a lot of times it isn't. I'm like preemptively preparing for this like big fight.
Perfect.
I'm preparing for the big fight, whatever that is. And usually it doesn't happen. So I'm constantly just trying to like calm myself down and, I really have to use mind over matter, like you said, to tell myself, give them the benefit of the doubt, ask them, how they're feeling, be open to hearing more of what they have to say, because I don't want to have conflict. Like Abdul was saying earlier, like I want peace and harmony and love, but I'm just ready for the fight.
Yeah, right. And you have the imprinting of an 8 mother. So there's also what you learned from her, which would amplify your tendency towards reactivity. And I will say that sixes in general, even the 629, like my son was a social 629. He was always prepared for the fight. And he carried around a paper clip. It always had to have paper clips. I go, where are all the paper clips going? And he goes, oh, they're in my pockets. And I go, pockets? He goes, yeah, I have them in all my pockets. And I said, why do you need paper clips in all your pockets? And he said, well, I open one end of the paper clip and it's then like a little knife. And I said, what are you gonna do with that? He said, well, if someone attacks me, I can stab them with the paperclip. And at first I'm thinking, what if they have a knife? But anyhow, one day he was about 13. He was walking home from my office to the house, and he was walking across the park, and two guys approached him that were older teenagers, and they said, "Hey, give me your money." And the one guy opened his hand for Brandon to give him their money, and he whipped out his paperclip. He stabbed the kid in his hand and booked it. He ran, and there were two of them. They didn't follow him. But I thought, boy, have I learned a lesson about what a paperclip can do. But he was always prepared for the time when he could be jumped. When, you know, the bully at school could turn the energy on him. So if he saw someone bullying someone else, he already knew what he was going to say, what he was going to do. He had it all rehearsed. Now, the bully never ended up doing that, so he didn't have to use that one. But money was demanded of him, and he just, you know, stabbed and went. He didn't look back. I said, "Did you look back?" He goes, "All I know is the guy went like this." I mean, because, you know, if someone stabbed you in the hand with a paperclip, it wouldn't be very comfortable. But he was lucky that they didn't follow him and see where he was and go after him. Anyhow, that's so true of the 6. Thank you, Erin. And, you know, Aida, you shared that it just would devastate you to hurt me, your closest intimate. And of course, I feel the same way as an 8. I'm going to want to go protect you. And 6s are protective too. And this is really important to understand, is they choose the people that matter to them or the vulnerable stranger, and they will step in and, if necessary, group to help others. But the prudent part of the 6 is what I want to touch on now. The way you're choosing to do what's safe until you do something that you've chosen is to be risky. So did you know that your whole life? And were you counter-phobic your whole life, or did it change after puberty?
It definitely changed after puberty. I discovered my mouth. And
attitude, you mean?
Yeah, exactly. And it came out of my mouth. But so yes, definitely not as a child. No, I was pretty. I did what I was told.
Were you sneaky though about things you wanted to do?
Oh, sure. I would go into my mother's bedroom and sneak candy that was the adult candy. Sure. But we all did that.
Well, the reason I'm teasing is that 6s will always say they did what they should, but they're always at the same time doing things that are breaking those rules. And the way 6s later.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. They later explain it that they're obedient in front of their authorities as a child. And then at puberty, all 6s become more self-possessed and say more, do more. You hear more from them. Does come out their mouth. They start talking back. And a lot of times parents will say, "Oh, she was just an ideal little girl. And then all of a sudden she hit 13 and she just doesn't listen to us anymore." And what happens is the 6, like any child, starts identifying more with their peers and their boyfriend or girlfriend, and then they act accordingly. They still don't want to get in trouble though. But did you talk back to your parents, to your teachers? Like, what happened after puberty? Why? And
yes, I talked. I definitely rebelled, snuck out, what every teenager does.
Yeah. I mean, and the 6 is rebellious.
Yes.
So when the 6 is no longer cooperating and being compliant because they feel they should, then there's full rebellion. And that's the part that shocks the parents. Instead of realizing, oh, this is age appropriate, they need to go through this so they become, autonomous, and they were a little too cooperative, younger, so you need to see them. Even if it takes them till 25 to rebel, it's got to happen with a 6. And did your parents see you as rebellious, or did they never know?
They probably did. I never asked them, but they probably did. I'm sure they did. Because I was the firstborn, so they were really tough on me. I couldn't do anything. So of course I rebelled against that.
Yeah.
And if I couldn't do it, I would figure out a way to do it without them knowing.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much. I mean, 6s are quite smart. They're not going to go without everything. Now, I do know 6s that were the 629 that were so scared that their parent would find out that they didn't do that, but they wanted to. So even if the 6 doesn't do it, they're human and they want to join their friends or do things that maybe their parents are a little overprotective about. So yeah, all young 6s need that benevolent guide to tell them how to make decisions so that they're not anxious, like Abdul was talking about, or overly rebellious. If you have a healthy guide, you can learn to manage that. And that's what's so wonderful about 6s learning the Enneagram, is you can let go of hiding your anxiety and start looking at how it informs you. So Aida, like, when did you know you were anxious? At what age?
Oh gosh, probably, that's a good one. I just thought it was normal. But I hid it. I hid it. So I didn't want anyone to know. Probably young. I'm going to guess maybe 10, 11, maybe younger than that. My mother always said I was a cautious child. So
yeah, that's a good way to say it. Mm-hmm. And that's how 6s can find themselves too, is to look back into their childhood. And if they were the cautious child that then became outspoken after puberty, they're not an 8, they're just a 6 going through the natural process of managing anxiety and moving through stages of life. And like, do you still try to hide your anxiety? And what do you do to hide it?
Oh God, yes. Yes, all the time. And unless I feel comfortable with someone, and I'll tell them. But other than that, I hide it because I don't like it.
Why? Why do you hide it? What are you afraid will happen?
Well, it makes me feel weak.
Yeah.
So I don't like that. It really bothers me. And by the way, when I really resonated with 6, I was like, oh God, I don't want to be a 6. I don't want to be a 6 because they're kind of known as being weak, and I don't like that. So of course I hide that. I hide it.
Exactly. And you know what? The 6 is no weaker than any other type. It's just the identification is that dichotomy between weak and strong, which they don't know yet. And there's no real way to write it well, which is why I had to program everything into the test. And I'm now changing it from saying you could be a 6 to your head type is 6, hoping that will help people, and it may be your lead type. Because when people answer 15, 20, do 15 or 20 of the program things that a 6 does, they just need to know they're a 6. But the defense strategy still comes up and says, no, I can't be a 6. I can't, no. I do what I have to do, but it's all compensated. And thank you. The anxiety is always running and you're trying to hide. Like I've never had to hide anxiety because I don't feel it. I've had to learn that my tension is anxiety, suppressed. But that natural anxiety that I should have, apprehension, as you know, I don't notice that, but I'll notice when I start to get a headache, and then that's because I've been tense. And why was I tense? And that's the way gut types experience anxiety. Now, the one, self-pres one, is more identified with their anxiety, but the rest of the gut types aren't. Thank you. Abdul, I wanted to ask you, what do you feel you'd like to say about being a 6 that touches you? Like, what do you want people to know about 6? That is, you shared about wanting to help young 6s. That's why I've spent so much money on the test, being able to have these additional detections, because I feel the same way. But as an 8, I'm trying to protect them from years of mistyping. But as a 6 yourself, what have I not said about 6 that is important, and what touches you?
What touches me about 6 is really how strong and resilient the 6 is. But the 6 needs to have that affirmed, and to through a relationship, through a benevolent relationship with someone that can guide them, all of these latent or hidden sort of abilities, attributes, strengths can really come to light. Especially I find with young social 6s that I work with, and self-pres. So it is the strength, it's the resilience, and I think the deepest thing that touches me about 6 is because the 6 is always scanning for what could go wrong, especially if they've had trauma in their life or haven't developed a secure attachment to their parents. They actually never really learn what trustworthy looks like or feels like.
Absolutely.
If you don't know what trustworthy looks like or feels like, then in a way you can become gullible to people that are unscrupulous or shouldn't be trusted, because you have such a hunger to trust someone. So with a lot of the 6s I work with, that's the trap for them, where they get into relationships with narcissistic spouses or partners, because they're so hungry for that mirroring and for those words of reassurance or affirmation.
And the strength and certainty that a narcissistic person can bring. They're very self-confident. One type of narcissist is very self-confident, but the other types are still very reassuring if you're part of their safety and security.
Yeah.
But then the 6, you're right. The gullible parts of 6, even the cynical 6, can be drawn into someone that seems like they're reassuring, and they know what to do when there's a problem. Yes, absolutely. Such a good point, Abdul.
Yeah. And to be honest, it's great to be a 6. I really wouldn't want to be any other type. Very much at home with all of what the type gives me, what I can access through this type. I think it's a very versatile type.
It is.
Yeah.
And very emotionally complex. So much more. The reason that 6s mistype as 4s is because of the emotions. The difference is the 4 goes into a mood, and they hold the mood. And so they identify with being emotional and having moods. Whereas the 6, the emotions changing constantly, and emotions they don't want are taking over, and they want to get rid of those. And they're changing based on their circumstances. And so they feel emotional and moody, and they can be, but they may just have 4 in their tritype. But if they're questioning authority, thank you very much, Abdul. I appreciate it. Anything else you want to say?
I just want to say that in my case, it hasn't really been mind over matter in my journey. I would say it's been heart over matter.
Great.
Accessing my heart center more, that's really what's helped me break through the anxiety, and just seeing the other person, because the 6 can really discern the fear in the other. Like, why is this person getting angry at you, or why are they? It's like, well, they've got their own defense strategy. And if you can empathize with that, I think that's the greatest liberation for the 6, not intellectually, but at a heart level. It's like, yeah, we're all in this human condition together. We're all suffering.
Exactly. Yeah. In fact, the way of compassion and benevolence is the only way to just free yourself of it. You can learn mind over matter to endure a situation, but until you go to your heart, you can't free up the mobilizing defenses that are happening. So people that have been trained to an anti-interrogation, they still show the tiniest micro expressions, even though they've been trained not to. I've had clients that were Rangers or Navy SEALs, and they were astounded that I could see, because no, I've had anti-interrogation training. You can't see. And I said, well, I've been studying micro expressions for many, many years, like 45 years. So I naturally see them. I'm not looking for them. And he said, but they're so tiny. And I've been interrogated and they didn't see it. I'm not trying to say that I was interrogating him, but he said, no, watch, I can go mind over matter and you won't know what I'm feeling. And I said, well, actually, you're feeling this, this, and this. He goes, but how can you possibly know that? And I said, well, I see your expression, but I also know what it is to be a counter-phobic 6 and a 6-3-8. So the really tough-minded counter-phobic 6. And I think that's what 6s need to know is we see your expressions, even if you think you're hiding it. So it's better to go to your heart and go to the truth. 8 has to learn that too. All 9 types really do need to go to the heart. But with the 6 and 8, we're so afraid that we're giving people the power to hurt us. So we try to disguise our feelings. Like I was sure no one knew what I felt. And then I was with my friends from that knew me from elementary school, not just high school. And they were saying that, yeah, I was tough, and they didn't always know what I was feeling unless I was hurt. And I go, you knew when I was hurt? And they go, oh yeah, you wore your feelings on your sleeve. I go, wait a minute, when? They said, oh, all the time. And here I was thinking, oh yeah, I was stone-faced. No one knew what I was feeling. Now, when you're 6, 7, 8, 9, you're learning how to do that. But if someone knows you at that age, they know your cues. But they did say they didn't always know why I was doing something. And they knew I was tough-minded. But they also knew I was tender-hearted. I just didn't show it or talk about it. And that's what we don't have to disguise so much. Once we know our type and our tritype, we can realize that to a degree, people are already tracking something in our demeanor, our posture, our word choices, our delivery. And the heart over the matter is perfect. Thank you for that, Abdul. I really appreciate it. Aaron, what would you like us to know that I haven't mentioned or that touches you deeply in life? Because people want to know how to resolve things with a 6, or how to, the biggest question is, what do I do when a 6 has shut me out? Because the 6 reaches their limit and they don't want to be in conflict, so they can move away.
Yeah. I mean, I'm definitely have been guilty of cutting off because I either just don't want to have the awkwardness of, you know, what could be like another fight or a really painful conversation. But I think the assumption as a 6 is, that the other person they're not going to get it. They're not going to be able to understand where you're coming from, and they're just going to blame you. And so it's like, if I don't just say, oh, it's all my fault, then they're not going to be happy. But I think if other people can if they can come to the table and own their part of it and say, maybe we had a miscommunication. I didn't mean to come off this way. I hope I didn't hurt you. Then it's a lot easier for us to say, oh my gosh, yeah, I didn't mean to hurt you either. Like, why was this so weird? Let's just move past it. So I think if we can just honestly put everything on the table and, without blaming each other, but just showing up and saying, here's my part, and like, what's most important is mending this relationship, not who did what or who said what. That's really meaningful to me.
Yeah, thank you, Erin, because the 6 is afraid that the blame and accusation is going to continue and continue. And it could also be good judgment, but the shutting off is to not take that constant mirroring and to be constantly on guard. You hit something really important. And the 6 is naturally on guard. So if they're in a rapport with someone where they feel blamed, the 6 can all of a sudden, they could have taken someone constantly blaming them or finding fault with them. And then suddenly one day the 6 will say, yeah, no more. And they don't want to be mean to the person. They just finally have the self-possessed part of their personality intact, and they don't continue with a relationship that feels destructive. But thank you for saying also there are times maybe when you could have worked it out. Thank you. Aida, do you relate to that? Feeling like that you'll take a lot of like contentious or blaming from others and from a long-term friend, let's say, and then suddenly just.
Well, that did happen. Yeah, that did happen. I was a really good friend of mine. She's sexual 4. She was always angry with me about something, always. And I'm not saying I was perfect in the relationship, but I was always in trouble. And there was one portion where we met for lunch and we talked, and I said, what can I do to help you when you're going through something like this, when you're feeling this way? Well, she thought I was a horrible person for saying that. So I was like, okay. And then time went by, and finally I hit the saturation point, and I let her go with love. And I hope she's doing really well right now, but I don't miss her, but I can love from afar. And I care. I still care about her.
Oh yeah. That's what I couldn't with 6.
Yeah. I couldn't do it anymore. It felt toxic. So
yeah. And a lot of 6s need the courage to do that. If they've gotten, like this Abdul mentioned, if they happen to get in a relationship with someone that is toxic to them, 6s often stay longer than the other types because they'll start to believe there's the blame, because the whole defense mechanism is organized around cooperation and this mutuality. And that 6 is the point on the Enneagram. If you go to the primary triangle, the 6 is the point that is meant to notice others. The heart, the 3, the center of the heart, is meant to initiate, to move towards others, to begin the engagement process. And the initiation, and then the 6 is meant to be the opposition, pointing out the other side, seeing what's wrong. 4 has already identified what's missing, but the 3 in the law of 3, the 3 is starting, the 6 is reacting, and then the 9 at the top is the neutralizing element. So we could look at the 3 forces. And they're often called the three forces. So when the 6 feels someone is toxic, they can be so loyal that they stay well beyond the time that's good for them. And sexuals can do that too, by the way, but any instinct. It's just really dominant with 6 and 9 because of the way the defense strategy is organized. Thank you. Now, is there anything you'd like us to know about type 6? Oh, no, yeah, or type 6 or you? What touches you?
What touches me is meeting people that are real and that reveal themselves. That's what I love the most, actually. And that's what I search for. That's what I search for. So I don't know if that's 6, but that's just me.
I think it's everybody, but really type 6 wants that more than anything. Like the 6 won't evade if someone's real with them.
No way.
If both people are real, the 6 is actually the type most likely to be real back.
Mm-hmm.
Kai and Yuen, what would you like us to know?
Yeah, for me, I would say my biggest hurt and disappointment as a 6 is people do not know how to initiate to fix a wrongdoing. You know what I mean?
Like a repair attempt, like someone's hurt you and they don't know how to fix it?
Yeah, I find that often I'm the one who has to initiate the repair, and sometimes, like you say, the 6 stays the longest in a toxic relationship. Even if I didn't initiate the wrong, I still feel I haven't done enough to go and make the thing less toxic or something like that. It's like this constant fear that I've not done enough.
Yes, exactly. And you've just named the perfect dichotomy. Like Aida named the dichotomy of revealing oneself or being evasive, and 6 does and wants to do both. And then you just revealed the dichotomy of like who's to blame. So the 6 needs to be able to blame someone, either the other or themselves, but someone's got to have the blame. And the most important thing is to realize, kind of what Aaron said, that everyone is, not to blame. Like no one's really to blame if you have compassion and empathy and sympathetic empathy, not just empathy, because empathy lets you know, allows you to put yourself in someone else's shoes. But if you don't have the same feeling about what it means to be in their shoes, then you still might not say or do the right thing. So it has to be sympathetic empathy. But how does someone repair a relationship with you? What do they need to do? If there's been a conflict and it seems like it can't be resolved, I know in the heart of every 6 that you want resolution, or you have to get away from the other person. But
Yeah.
What do you need them to do, say or do?
Acknowledge what happened would be a very low bar for me to expect. And often I don't get that. And then I get disappointed.
Yeah, it's for someone to even do the low bar actually is a high bar in reality, because most people can't admit wrongdoing because then their defense strategy crumbles.
Yes.
But some 6s over apologize. Oh, I'm sorry. But that's another defense strategy. So not saying, some 6s can't say they're sorry at all.
Yep.
So there just needs to be a natural, I'm really sorry that happened. I didn't mean that. I hope you didn't misunderstand the way. I think I was a little too abrupt, or possibly that's really helpful for anyone to learn, but especially a 6, because it begins the conversation. But what happens when someone doesn't say it perfectly, but their heart is that they want to repair with you?
I can sense that. I actually can sense if they are genuine or authentic about wanting to repair, because I grew up not knowing that I have ADHD and Asperger's, and at the age of 40, I sort of told my mom about it, And even in our culture, we don't say, oh, I'm sorry I didn't do this and this for you. But I could sense that my mom is making amends in her own little ways, that she has opened her heart at this age. So I have a much better relationship with her and my dad now. You know, things have changed. So I can sense her part in wanting to make things better or make things right. With other friends, maybe not so much, but I'm learning to manage my expectations around it.
Yeah, thank you, Kai. That's perfect. That's exactly what we all have to do, but sixes in particular, because the six one has that door way too open, or they close it way too tight. And if the six remembers that they're a human and the other person's a human, and maybe you'll never agree on everything, but it doesn't mean you have to lose the relationship. You just have to redefine it.
Yeah.
Just as you can see with your mother, that she, in her way, is making amends is huge.
Yes.
Yuen, what would you like us to know about type 6 that I didn't mention, and how do people make amends with you? What works?
I think probably just need to understand that we constantly are trying to manage the chaos in our mind. So because we need to manage that, we become a good tracker. So when we are a good tracker, the things that we can understand, we tend to give a very good meaning of that. The things that we couldn't understand, we go to the worst case scenario. So we can go very extreme, at least in my case. So I don't think people really need to make amends, but it's more on my part that I need to understand where they're coming from.
And forgive. The 6 is known for having, being the Enneagram type that holds grudges the most. And when I've interviewed 6s, the grudge is based on the fear of submission, that if they don't hold the grudge, that they will then submit to something that wasn't fair or wasn't right or didn't feel fair or right. And so really, when people are asking me these questions, it's that they want to know how to break down the grudge enough to have the conversation for the relationship to move to a new level. And it's hard for 6s to let go of the past, 6 and 4. So you have 4 and 6 in your Tritype. So what do people need to do if they really care to show you, so you feel safe enough to even consider continuing the relationship?
For me, it would be understand that it takes time. So some people, when they make amends, they want to go back to the old way right away. So I think it's not quite possible right away. The trust need to rebuild from there. Like, you know, when things cleared up, we come to the new understanding. So we have a new boundary. Okay, so that is what happened in the past because lack of this, lack of understanding of here. So is it possible to implement all this right away? I don't think humanly is possible because we are still, you know, just human, right? So slowly build back that. Okay, maybe I can compromise this. Probably you might want to, you know, do this for me. Probably, you know, I can try to understand that maybe I'm being too nitpicky in this area, that area. You know, I should also not be.
It's wonderful because what you do is try to organize your chaos.
Yes.
That's what 6s are doing, putting some sort of structure. And I loved what you said about if we know, we do, you know, what we should or whatever, but we don't know, we think of the worst case scenario, and that everything's, do I know it or not know it? And what do I need to do? Like, you might read books from the early years where they talk about the head types being the doing types. And people say, wait, they're thinking, why are they doing? Well, they're trying to do or manage the anxiety and the chaos, and they're trying to learn whatever they need to learn to be able to survive in the world. So it's very meaningful. But so many of the books have different terms for the centers and the triads, but if you understand what the person was trying to communicate, it's all very meaningful. Like the 6 is, what do I need to know? What don't I know? And how am I going to get that information? So the preoccupation for the 6 is on thinking, but the problem, as I mentioned, is the overthinking and then projecting like a screen, and then having a quarrel with a projection rather than the person or the situation. And a lot of times in relationships, and you're a double 6 couple, when the 6 gets to that place of fear and chaos, they can project onto the other something that isn't fully true.
Yes.
Yes.
But how do you, as a couple, both being 6, manage when one of you is anxious or the other, or are you anxious at the same time, or when one of you is in defense? Like, do it this way. What do you think the pros and cons are of a double 6 relationship? Now, you do have different instincts.
Yeah, I think the bad part of the relationship will be we project on each other. Like, because I lack of courage myself, I will project it onto him. You should do that for me so that I do not need to have the courage to do it myself. Right?
Yes.
But the good part will be we both project out there, so we become really united.
Yes.
Then let's go and attack that, so the relationship can function. So it seems like, okay, there is a bigger problem out there. Let's solve this out there.
Yeah, there's synchronicity
Yes.
in both being equally certain about something together. I think for me, my advantage of two 6s together is sometimes we pass the baton of who looks more like an authority in the moment, So if I'm more sure about something, I become the authority. And if she is more sure in the moment, I will treat her as the authority in that moment. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we don't want to be in that authority at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. I thank you very much. I want to ask one question of Dahlia, if you will, because years ago you told me the best story about a bumper sticker you saw when you're driving on the freeway. Do you remember it? And the bumper sticker said, "Challenge authority." And yes. Do you remember all the stages you went through thinking about that as you were driving? Will you share that with the group?
Well, it just sort of woke me up into thinking that, who is really the authority? And am I the authority? I certainly didn't think I was an authority. I didn't think I earned any right. And at the time, it didn't occur to me that I can be my own authority. Who says what authority we should listen to, and who is the right authority to follow and be trustworthy, or to trust. Yeah. And that just really woke me up, because nobody really is an authority. I mean, nobody and everybody. So we have to listen to obviously the authorities that, the laws and things like that. But, as a kid, like all the authority figures, my mom, my dad, the teachers, I went to Catholic school, the nuns, any adult or anybody older than me was an authority. And when I was little, my parents would always say, well, you respect your elders. Well, not all the elders were decent and cool people. And I was sort of taught to trust and put my life, in the hands of any authority. So I don't know.
You're giving a great example of what Abdul's talking about, that the 6 can be taught to be submissive and respect authority, but you had sensations or suspicions, or you could see when someone was not such a cool authority. And really, young 6s need to be able to distinguish between trustworthy and not.
Yeah. So, and when you can allow yourself to do that, and when is it okay to sort of challenge them? Because a lot of authority figures think they're the boss, and they will come back. 6s, I don't want conflict. I'm not out to puff myself up and get in somebody's face. So if somebody's an authority figure, it's like, okay, I get it. All right, okay, but when somebody is trying to be my authority figure in a marriage, or one of my siblings, or maybe it's just a coworker, and they think that their opinion might override mine, I had to really realize that, it's just an opinion. Some of it is just opinion. And so I had to decipher, for myself, who I'm really going to challenge or believe, who I'm going to say, okay, yeah, you're an authentic authority. Yeah.
How about you're the 648 Tritype, so you're reactive as well. When did you hide it all until puberty, like Aida? And then did suddenly in puberty start talking back? And
oh yeah, I was a good little girl. I didn't talk back, but there was capital punishment if I did. So, that made a big, but I certainly rebelled like Aida did. I did. I'd had it. I think when we're suppressed as little kids and being told what to do, and we live in a constant state of fear as a 6, and then we realized, wait a minute, I don't have to fear this. You get angry. Yeah. You can only handle so much fear for so long, and then it's like somebody has a hold of you, and you're watching the whole world go by, and I felt like I was under somebody's thumb all the time. Don't do this or this will happen. So I just couldn't wait till I was 18 so I could just, sorry, but because, if you have parents that are over, like my parents, the strict parents, I just couldn't wait till I was 18, because that's when I was a real adult. So I could say, you know what I think of you, of course that went over like a fart in church. So yeah, anyway, I bulldozed out of my mom's house, and that's a long story. But anyway, I think that's when I started to kind of come into my own. And that's right after that, I met you, Katherine, and I was 19. I was 19. And I won't tell you how old I am now, but
it's been a long time.
I've learned a lot. And I am a 6, and I'm proud to be a 6.
Yeah, it's such a wonderful thing to hear. And what you don't know is Delia was one of my test subjects where I'd bring in the cards. Yeah. That word.
And I would always change. I was one of those people. Like, what is this? Oh, just pick a word. Just
Yeah, just one word. Well,
one word. Like, well, I don't know. That depends.
Yeah.
Give me the situation.
One of the first people to just teach me about it depends. And then I heard it everywhere with 6s.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, because we sit on the fence.
right.
I sit on the fence, and I don't know what decision I'm going to make depending on whatever. I just look and I see everybody's opinions. I see, and I just say, well, because I don't want any conflict, or I just shut it. I sit on the fence. I see both sides. It's all good. Can't we all just get along? That's me.
Yeah. But if,
right?
Yeah,
I
if
see Linda
someone's
putting
not
her thumb up there.
trustworthy or doing something that could hurt someone, or is lying about someone, or misrepresenting them in a way, you'll at least tell the other person. Even if you don't speak up to the offender, you would still tell the other person they were being talked about. This is another side of 6 I should have mentioned, is they will warn other vulnerable people that they're being hurting their reputation or saying something untrue. So even if the 6 doesn't want to go directly to the person making the accusation or saying the untruth, you at least warn people. It's really important to understand this about 6. They warn others of potential danger or people that weren't or aren't behaving in a trustworthy manner. Do you remember doing that? Do you see that in your life, that you do that?
What's so funny is that the table was turned on me, and somebody told me about a person that I was very, very much involved with, saying that they were cheating on me, or I love you enough to tell you this because you're my friend and I think you should know. And and everybody on that person's side said, yeah, you should thank that person for telling you, something that you really should know. And in my case, in this particular case, it was nobody's business. Maybe I chose to be with a bad boy, and that was working for me for the time being. And maybe I knew about his indiscretions or whatever. With that same person, I knew that her husband was cheating on her and that he was flirting with me. I would never say that to her. The truth comes out in the end. I certainly didn't want to be the one to tell her. So this is a very
fine line.
Our personal relationship, we choose who we want to be with at the time, and we kind of know what bag of goods we had until we don't. And so I understand that I would like to say, I want to be the first one, hey, but I don't do that anymore. I just don't do that. I just feel like, unless, somebody's life is being threatened, of course.
Yeah. Well, I think there are these social values, and what can happen to the 6 as well, which is what you're pointing out when it happened to you. Like when you were protecting others, you just wanted them to make an informed decision or know that they shouldn't fully trust someone. But in your case, you're talking about, yeah, maybe you already knew, and maybe you didn't want to know everything. And I'm going to guess, and correct me where I'm wrong, that in that scenario, those people that were saying, oh yeah, you should know, you should thank that person, then created a dilemma for you that was really uncomfortable. And that is, they were talking about whether you should or shouldn't be with someone. And that should
Absolutely.
be your decision.
Right. Yeah. And then not only that, they judged me because I chose
the relationship
over the lifelong friendships I had with this group of women. And still to this day, I don't talk to them because they judged me. And I couldn't help who I loved. And I'm human, And I kind of knew that that relationship will take its course. And maybe that's who I was at the time in my life. And it was okay. So
The calculated risk part of 6, that, you know,
exactly.
not,
Exactly.
in some ways, you're not as naive as people think. And there is this ability to kind of make your choice, but you don't want your friends to tell you or make it their business to tell you who you shouldn't, who you should or
Right. I
shouldn't.
mean, I would never.
And they're like your
judge.
parents again.
It's up to whoever they want to, you know, fine, whatever. I'm not going to sit back and judge you. I'm not in your shoes. It's not my life.
Yeah. And so that really hurts. You know, you've hit on something really important for the type 6, and that is needing relationships that accept you as you are,
Mm-hmm.
and not relationships that become authoritarian and telling you how you should or shouldn't conduct your life.
Well, when I was younger, you know, this same group of women, I worshiped them. I, you know, they took care of me and they took me in and they were showing me the ropes on how to be, you know, just a decent woman and all this. And I think they didn't cut the umbilical cord. They didn't realize became my own person and I didn't need their approval anymore. Yeah. So okay, you know, but I never looked, I never regretted it. And I think that I felt more self-respect for myself after that. And I realized everybody's relationships are always very, very private. And there's a reason why people are with who they're with. And, you know, I'm not going to run off and tattletale over who's cheating on. It's horrible. Who wants to hear? I mean, you know, sometimes people have arranged relationships and people's standard of commitments are different, you know?
Exactly. It's really important, and I want to open it up to general questions. We have a few more minutes. You know, I have a bunch of questions from that people sent in, but based on those of you that are here, does anyone want to ask questions of the 6s? Yes, Jerome.
Yes, I am a longtime person of the Enneagram. In fact, I met Claudio in 1972 and was in his first class in Berkeley in 1974. Oh. And we were introduced by Rabbi Zalman Schachter back then, and they were pretty close, Claudio and Zalman. And we had this wonderful class, and then I taught a class at Claudio's Seekers After Truth. I don't remember what year it was, probably 73 or 74. And what I discovered recently, after 46 years, was that 6s have a quality that is stunning, in my opinion, and that is at times we seem to really just know. There's no real thinking about it. There's no reasoning about it. There's no feeling about it. It's just no. I thought this was a strange character of my own, but I found out that there were other 6s that had this when I took the Enneagram Prison Project course. So my question is, I should give you a couple of examples. The first example of this kind of knowing was in 1976. My son had a Wilms tumor, a kidney cancer, that had metastasized to his lungs. And I just knew he was going to live. And I didn't spend my time worrying about how he was doing. I got on the phone and found alternative healers that could help with the process. And my girlfriend and I would, I wasn't with his mother at the time, my girlfriend and I would spend every other night in the hospital with him. And we'd work with him with these, with guided imagery for children, which we called mind stories. And lo and behold, when he was 11 years old, the surgeon told us, do you know, Micah Friedman is a miracle. He was the first person with metastatic Wilms tumor to ever survive.
Wow.
Wow.
He's now 51 and has a beautiful baby daughter, 19 months.
Oh.
So I'm really happy about that.
Yeah.
And he lives about 10 minutes away. And then in 1997, I had this knowing that muscle invasive bladder cancer was not going to be my demise. I just knew it. And I had a session with Leslie Davenport, you may know of her. And in that session, I just knew it was true. And here it is 24 years later, and I'm still alive and well and functioning pretty good for an 81-year-old person.
Yeah.
So,
You know, I've recognized that in sixes from the very beginning, just like the story with my son with the paperclip. There's a point, there's an inner knowing available to the six. And when they quiet the what can go wrong and just listen to that knowing, they will
right.
have, and they're extraordinary. I count on my best friend doing that for me as a six, that her inner knowing and when she's certain about something, even if it's something she'd normally feel chaos about, she's always right. And I find sixes are incredibly strong. And actually, one of the conversations that I had with Naranjo was about sixes and this dichotomy. And he learned the dichotomy discussion with Ichazo, at least that's what he told me, but that he had taken it further and had added another dimension to the way he saw the dichotomies. That the pushy surrender is actually that strength, but the need to belong and get along. And that after surrender, the six is pushy again, and that it's a continuum. And trying to get the truth, that the real drive for the six is to get the right truth, which resides within them, of course, but in an authority that can affirm what they know. And what did it take for you to just know? Was it just there and you allowed it and put your energy into the other things you needed to do? How about in the rest of life or on a daily basis?
Well, it seems like, you know, how sixes have the base quality of fear. So on a daily basis, that plays a part. Yeah, what?
It's not even just fear, it's a fear of fear.
Yeah, true. And
I learned that from
so,
that's what I'm saying.
Right, yeah. So I think this knowing comes when it's so bad that it's beyond fear, or it's so good that it's beyond fear. So my most recent one was applying for the mindfulness meditation teacher training certification with Jack Cornfield and Tara Brock. And I just knew I would get in. And that starts in a couple of months. So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah,
but This
Jerome, what instinct do you identify with?
self-pres.
Ah, okay, very good.
So I knew that I would get into that, which was a difficult thing to get into, and that was a result of the EPP course. And I guess I should add that between
Enneagram Prison Project. If you don't know
Yeah.
EP, yeah.
So in 89 to 92, I studied with David and Helen for a long, long time. You know, I went to Aslan with Helen, and Claudio was there. It was pretty amazing. And he somehow remembered me.
Oh,
But-
he does actually. Everyone resides or did reside in his memory. He was actually very good at that.
Yeah. So that was also part of my training, and I just feel like when this knowing comes up, there's no question. Nobody can change the destiny of the knowing. And so I just wanted to know if any of the panelists have had this experience, because it's so prominent in critical times in my life.
Yeah. Let's ask them.
Yes, that's why I raised my hand.
And Abdul had to go for a client, but we still have with
Your bestie.
With Delia, we still have my bestie, wherever she went, there she is. And Delia is a longtime friend as well. And Kai and Yuen and Aaron, if you guys would speak to that, it's really important. Like when you just know something. Well, he's sharing that of this really extraordinary strength of the 6 is when things are really, really bad or really, really good, that he just knows. Like he knew that his son was going to survive a very dangerous cancer. He just knew. I knew that about my own son, Spencer, remember, where, they told me to abort and he was born perfect, but there was this possibility, but I just knew. But and it's easier to do for an 8, but it's a real strength of the 6 when they just know. And it is part of the surrender, by the way, this submitting to the universe, to destiny, to the divine, whatever word we want to use. It's the high side of submitting for the 6. And then they can just allow the truth, the inner truth, to unfold. But can you think of the times that Jerome is talking about where you just knew something?
I can relate to that throughout my career for the last 15 years. I mean, I've had businesses that go up and down, but somehow the money will always show up and I would find something that I can do even though the previous business has gone down, and I will always have food on the table, and it has appeared miraculously over and over again in my life that I can have something to do, and I never given up, and it's always been an enduring situation that I can fall back on.
Yeah, thank you. And Yuen, how about the times when you just knew?
It happens more and more now, probably because I'm a road to become an experienced 6.
Yeah.
Also, with more information, because after all, we still had type. So the knowledge, the things, the experience that we learn, when we don't go to the extreme. So I didn't know, I'm look very sure, or I know, but many people has told me that you seems like you know. So when I ask myself, and if I told myself, don't go to the ambiguity, don't be the 6 that trying to oh, I don't know, or I don't want to be too certain. What if that happened?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And you know what? It's logical to move to tell you right now, because she was the one who also told me many years ago that she calmed down with the things I had shared with her about being a 6, and she wasn't as anxious. And then what rose in her was anxiety, that maybe she should have been worrying about some of the things she was no longer anxious about. But there isn't an inner knowing. And Dahlia, can you share with Jerome how you have that inner knowing? And when you just know something, even when the odds are against it, even.
Yeah. This happened before I was even born. So I've had this knowing since I was a baby up till the point where I was 19. And you know this story. I always knew, like I just knew that I wasn't supposed to be here. I just knew. I just felt like I was not part of,
This reality.
And it was a relationship between me and my mom. There was always, and with my other sisters and my dad, everything was fine. But with me and my mom, it was just really it was just very hard. Anyway, my mom to me, felt like did a number on me, making me feel inferior or not living up to my other sister's potentials and things like that. And she always said I was insane. And so I took everything literally. And my mom's a nurse, a psych nurse. So I kept thinking, oh, I'm insane, which whatever that meant. I was little, I don't know. I just thought, well, oh, you're insane, So because I felt so depleted and questioned my existence, I went to my very first counselor, and I was 19, and she hypnotized me, because she ended up doing that because she asked me, when's the first time you didn't feel loved? And I said, when did you feel your mom didn't want you? From the very beginning, before I even was here, I just felt this like I wasn't supposed to be here. Anyway, long story short, I went to my mom and I said, Mom, I just have had this feeling that I'm just not supposed to be here. Something's wrong. And she looked at me with horror, and she says, your sister was 6 months old, and I didn't know what birth control was. And when I found out I was pregnant with you, I freaked out, and I went for an abortion. And I went to the clinic, made the appointment. I walked in, I was in there, and I just changed my mind. I turned around and changed my mind. But that feeling that was the rejection of her went straight into me and was with me the whole time.
And then, so through your childhood, you felt that separation. Have you had inner knowings also with like when things are really wonderful? Does that also open up?
Well, I knew that I was pregnant with Madeline. I dreamt the night before that I had conceived a child, and it was a girl, and her name's Madeline. And sure enough, I was pregnant, and it's a girl, and she's Madeline. So I know. So yeah. But no, this knowing is just like this gut thing. It's just an undeniable gut. Like nothing, nothing can get in the way. It's a power that it's beyond me.
Exactly. And it's what I really trust 6s can do when they are caught in the loop the anxious loop of the cingulate gyrus, of the repetition of what they're afraid of, that if they can not try to stop the anxiety, but go to the worst case scenario, actually, and push beyond it, make it even more ridiculous, and then the 6 kind of comes back to center and can get to their inner knowing. But if they try to just suppress their anxiety, it leaks out everywhere.
It really does.
Yeah.
And I'm still working on it. I'm very, emotional talking about it. And my mom's gone now, so, but I was kind of relieved, because now I kind of felt like I survived through all of it. I'm still here.
Yeah. And
it's crazy how much power, authority that somebody can have over me. Feels like a hold. Anyway.
But wonderfully, you were given the Tritype that would also speak truth and push against. And your sexual and self-pres are very close, so they would be linked with your survival to do so.
Right.
Yeah, let's ask Aida too, because Aida, do you know those times when you just know something, even if it seems terrible and you get out of feelings of anxiety or panic and you just know? Okay.
I have lived the life of a 6 that's been on her own for her whole life. My whole life I've been on my own. And so it's one of the greatest fears of 6 is to be in the world alone. So, I mean, I've been in and out of homelessness, but I survived, and I knew I would. And I did everything in my power that I would survive and get back on my feet. So that's where I mean, it was hard. I'm not saying it wasn't hard. It was very hard. But I did it, and I knew I would do it. So, I mean, I don't know if that's prevalent, but
I think it is with you. I think even when things are really stressful, when you name it and you go above it, in essence, you rise up and see that things are going to unfold as they should, which is very threatening to all of us, but to a 6, in terms of needing the markers, the structure, the points of control that let you know you'll be safe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and also buying my home. It took a long time for me to get into this house. It took from April to October. And right at the end, right before the end, I lost it because I couldn't come up with the funds, and I did not qualify for a loan because it was the recession. But when I saw it, I knew I was going to be here. I just knew it. And even in the end, where I had to sign the papers to let it go, I just kept asking questions. What about if I do this? What about if I do that? Finally, the woman goes, I asked my dad if he would help me, and he said yes. And I said, okay. I went to the person in charge of the program of this home, and she said there was someone else in line for it, and I was out. I went to go sign the papers with my loan officer, and I told her. She goes, well, wait a minute. I think she was an 8, by the way. She goes, let me go over this person's head and let's see what happens. In 10 minutes, I got the house. But I knew I was supposed to be in this house. It was a roller coaster, but I got it.
And you didn't. Yeah.
I just had. She was cute. She goes, because of your tenacity, you got the house. Because I never really gave up. I did for a second, just a second, but then I went back. What about this? What about that? So.
And what I want to highlight
But I
is,
knew I was supposed to live here.
but also you asked the right question.
But yeah, that was painful.
Yeah. That's another way to show how questioning can be a good thing, because your tenacity inquiring made someone want to step in and let you keep the place too. So thank you. Erin?
Oh yeah, I definitely, I think it's something, maybe that has come more with age. When I was younger, I don't think I could hear that the certainty of something, because my mental dialogue would kind of take over, and I try to predict it and plan it out, figure it out. But the more I've kind of come into myself, I do have like a voice that lets me know, when I need to know, when it's actually important. And a lot of the stuff that happens in my mind isn't important. I just, get kind of trapped in that hamster wheel. But when it's really important, there is a sense of like, I just kind of know. And maybe more often it has to do with things that aren't related to me. It's like for other people. But I kind of just always kind of know how things are going to turn out. And I have a really strong sense of people. And so sometimes even if I don't have evidence for that sense, I'll just kind of feel, like maybe I just know somebody is like the right person for me for a friendship, or, or the other way, I might just get a no on somebody. And I try to trust that now. I certainly wait until everything unfolds, but I'm usually not surprised anymore. So
yeah, that's a good way of saying it. Thank you for the line of discussion, Jerome, and thank you everybody for answering. That is, I'm very grateful actually to all of you and for your incredible disclosure. And I'm hoping that sixes that are identifying with other types begin to look at how the defense mechanism keeps them from knowing they're a six. It's not that they aren't smart enough to know, and that they're meant to identify with another type first until they really get this system. And as Jerome probably knows, I mean, Claudio, even at one of the conferences, said hello to a six, talked to him, and he said, and you're six, correct? And he said, no, I'm a nine. I want peace. And let me tell you why. And he started explaining it. And Claudio just had such a sad look on his face. And he said, Katherine, someone has got to help these sixes. And I didn't really think that at that time, because that was like in 2004. But I had already made my card test then, and I was already beginning to see the patterns in a new way that all the wonderful sixes have shared with me over the years. And having a six child and best friend that's a six and six friends, I find you guys adorable. So I wanted everyone to have that opportunity. But now that I'm saying this right now about Claudio, I forgot he said that. I completely forgot. But I know the person he was talking to. I remember the conversation, and there's it is sad when people haven't gotten their type yet. And I understand what Claudio was talking about, because he wanted everybody to have the opportunity to know what they were really, how they were hiding a piece of truth from themselves. And that it wasn't deliberate, it wasn't meant to be anything other than a way to be safe. And that once we knew that, we had the chance to do the deeper work. And he liked the notion of my work with Tritype, but he hadn't really organized it that way. But he did feel like if there was a hierarchy, like he did like the notion of stacking the instincts, because we did talk about that. And he was considering that maybe the centers could be stacked like the instincts. Because what many people don't know is that when he created the idea of the instincts, it was that he noticed people having similar qualities that were more focused on the domain of physical survival and the domain of social relating and the domain of the one-to-one relationship. And that what he had learned from Ichazo were these triads, instinctual triads, and that he considered that there was another division beyond just the type, the center, and the type, because he saw these variations within type. So he took Ichazo's 3 centers, instinctual centers, which were conservation, relations, and originally syntony, but changed to adaptation. And he made them in a primitive form and said, okay, with his psychological knowledge and all of his diverse knowledge, he thought, well, if I take those same 3 instincts and put them at the level of primal survival, those would be subtypes of the Enneagram types. And when people know that and they write about the type and the instinct together, which is called subtype, it's a subdivision of the type, then it rings true for people. If they read it or hear it, they resonate. But if someone's trying to rewrite what an individual has already written about the instincts, if they don't know that it's based on that particular formula of a division within a division, and it was based on the original triads, then it won't ring true to people. And they'll say, well, I'm this, but I'm not that. So if everyone just knew that Claudio did not move away from the concept from Ichazo, he just was respectful and didn't use Ichazo, those terms that were since trademarked, and was teaching privately. And there was always a respect for what he learned from Ichazo, but he also took it a step further in terms of the instincts as these subtypes. And actually, when I first met him in '96, and he looked at my research, he said that he had thought that he needed to learn a lot more because he didn't really work with people's instincts. He had just begun exploring it again right before he met me. And that he felt like he hadn't really seen them all as accurately. And he added more. And I was very lucky that I happened to have the chance to be with him when I did my research. And he did his first training in 23 and a half years. And we were able to connect on that level. And he really found that he also had seen where people had like a mini passion. And it was that their instinct was so strong that he couldn't quite tell their type. And that he used a sand sifter. And he just put people in this sand sifter and they go into their correct type. But there would always be a few pieces of sand that were too big that wouldn't just drop in. And that he was exploring that idea of why. And he retyped Hitler. He originally had him as a 6 and he changed him to a sexual 4. And he had Patton as a sexual 4 and he retyped him as an 8. He continued to learn, and he said that after talking to other people that had expertise he did not have, he would modify his understanding. And he did that. And I really respect him for that because he continued to do that. And the one question that I was asked is about integration, disintegration, because it's confusing what was transmitted through the years. And Claudio told me in the 96 training, because actually I was the one who asked the question, wait a minute, I've done all this research and people seem to use their lines of connection positively, both lines, and both lines negatively. And the first thing he said, the first statement he made was that he just looks at pathology and what's in the way of your inner knowing and letting go of the ego, the tyranny of the ego. But that he was misquoted, that in one study group, he thought of the ideas of using the arrows, which is, for those of you who don't know, the triangle is mapping the law of three, and the hexad, the 142857, is mapping the law of seven. And of course, the circle is the law of 0 or 1. And it creates the dynamic aspect of both creation and movement within the universe. So he was looking at, maybe it's harder to go one direction and easier to go another. And he played with that idea. And then he remembered Ichazo's trialectics, which is everything's in the law of three, and that you couldn't just go one direction or the other. It wouldn't fit the movement within the Enneagram of being patterns of three everywhere. So he dropped it. And then it was picked up in particular by Father Robert Oakes in that class. And he liked the idea of using those movements along the lines of connection, one way or the other, as to how to work on yourself. And then it was transmitted. And the irony is that a lot of people that were even in his groups where he said, no, I decide not to use that, was like spaghetti threw against the wall, and what sticks he knows is true, what didn't stick isn't true. And they read the books of people who had studied under Oakes, and they added it to their work as well, which was fascinating to him, that an error could be, even people who knew he didn't use it then put it into their books. But he was not the type. He was a very humble guy, and actually I say guy, but man. And he would not try to force it. It'd be, if someone wanted to know, they could ask him. So I just happened to ask, but he did put it in his book, Enneatypes in psychotherapy. He did document it there, and it is on videos that you might still be able to get on YouTube, but you can purchase. So he did begin to see that it was tragic that people were mistyping based on this understanding, because he felt like he'd been clear all along that no, those are your lines of connection. One isn't good and one isn't bad. You're always having the dynamic of your type with your two lines of connection, and your type with your two wings. The wings are omnipresent. I didn't mean to go into that, but it was one of the questions a lot of people have been asking me lately. So I thought I'd just explain that it was really an accident that then was disseminated, because no one said, hey, wait a minute. And I didn't even say, wait a minute. I just told people who studied with me that, oh no, you both use both wings, both lines of connection. And when you're in a negative space, you're using all of it at once, and you're using your dominant type in each center. But I didn't make a public outcry that, no, this is wrong. But I just feel like it would be really helpful for people to know the truth, that it was a misquote of what he said. And he never meant for it to be a formula for typing someone, or not seeing the high side of their line of connection. Like he said, well, Katherine, if you're the 8, you have 2 and 5, and I'm sure you can see times when you're coming from a place of compassion and empathy where you're using 5 and 2. And he said, I'm sure there are times when you are not coming from your a version of higher self, and that you see the 8, 2, and 5 just constantly moving. And that was true. He actually wanted me to look at, I didn't go through a sand sifter, and at that time he had not recognized the archetype of the priest, and that's a whole nother thing. That's the visual way we look. And he wanted to know whether I was an 8, a 7, or a 4. And he said, would I consider for a month looking at myself as an 8, I'd already done, as a 4, and then as a 7. And I did it. I actually spent a month saying, oh, I did that for these reasons, considering I was a 7. And I did it for a month with a 4. And this was at the same time I was developing Tritype, but I didn't call it Tritype. I called it 3 types. But I didn't like formalize it. But I knew, like the instincts, there was a stacking. And I thought, I think Naranjo is seeing what I've seen in others, and he's seeing in me. And it was the best thing I could have ever done, because I let in my 4. I didn't want to be a 4 in the Tritype. And doing that, I could find the things that were 4, which when we do that, is just as liberating, finding the other types in our Tritype. And then I next time I saw Claudio, I told him my experience. He asked me and how I decided and what. And then he said, oh, now I see an 8 I had not seen before. And everything leads to a greater awareness, but it's based on the defense strategy. We have to always go back to this defense strategy. Yes, there are archetypes, visual archetypes, that were kind of identified in the early Enneagram. But remember, it's only 50 years old, so a lot more unfolded. And where I found it was in the micro expressions more than anything, and the talk style and language, like where our attention actually goes. Not like I've worked with identical twins that, I mean, if they held still and didn't move, they looked identical. But then once there was an issue, they were 2 different Tritypes and 2 different instincts, and their parents could not figure it out, why they had to parent the children differently. So that's why they came to me, because they wanted to learn how to have them be the same. And I said, actually, they're 2 different Tritypes, and they're 2 different instinctual types. They're going to be different, and this is how. So I encourage everybody to continue to consider what you don't know about yourself. And the other thing that both Ichazo and Naranjo said is that if we decide to go on the spiritual journey and we're doing it alone, it's extraordinary, because the alternative is to do nothing and hope for the best. But if you are going the way that will open your consciousness and see what you don't see and put you more directly in union with your true self, then work hard. But he said, if you really want to know more, do it with someone else in tandem with a truthful other where you would be honest. And he said the best way to do the work is in a group, and a group that cares enough about you to not criticize you, but to help you see what you don't see. And I think a lot of us lack that if we have a caring friend that we trust, that's benevolent and giving us the feedback, we're more receptive. Or sometimes we have to be a little stronger about it if we really, really care. And then the other thing is, it's hard to have a group where everyone agrees to confidentiality and caring and compassion, and to stay in that space and be honest in a benevolent way. So I encourage everybody to try and find that, because it really, really has been extraordinary for me in my life to have all three scenarios. And we can live a happier, more fulfilling life if we're coming from compassion. So I just want to thank you all so very much. And Jerome, I met you a few years back. Do you remember that?
Where did we meet?
It was, I think it was in Berkeley at an event with Helen, maybe in the
2010.
Well,
I was on, could it have been 2010?
It could have, absolutely. I went everywhere. And of course, I've always did Helen and David's. I was there stand-in 8 because I live in Menlo Park. So I was always.
So one more thing was, since you've talked so much about Claudio, when I walked into that first class in 1974, he took one look at me and he said, well, he knew me. So he said, oh, here we have a doubter. And guess what? I doubted it.
Of course.
So it was pretty funny, to recognize that. It was pretty sweet too.
Yeah, yeah. Here we have a doubter. Yeah, he did do that actually when I met him. There were only supposed to be like, I think 35 people, and then there were like 75 people. They had to finally cut it off. And it was chaotic because there were only 35 badges, or however many people we were supposed to be, with names. And then all the rest of the people didn't have names. And there weren't enough chairs, so some people had to sit on the floor. And it was like no one, the organizer nor Claudio, did anything to modify that. And I'm thinking, oh, wow, this is a real incubator here, because these people are used to being in trainings with Don and Rusty, or Helen and David, or Ted and Kathy, where everything's kind of taken care of. There's security and certainty, and like no one knew if they were going to get a badge or not get a badge. And I thought, wow, I'm seeing some of these people in a whole new light, because if we don't have our structure, our security, we show our defense strategy. And I said, when Claudia and I were discussing my research and stuff, I go, well, what about those people that were stressed out that they didn't have a badge? Why not just get little stick-on badges? He said, well, it's an experiment. If it's what happened, and how people manage that says a lot about their type. And it did. And I thought, oh, okay. Because I've never done a training like that. Everybody gets a name, everyone gets a tag. I don't want anybody not to have a tag. And I thought, I did learn a lot more about people, but we don't want to have to learn that way. So, yeah, it was fascinating. So I wish you the best with the Enneagram Prison Project, Jerome. I was in that for a while, and I taught actually in San Mateo 25 years ago with drug addicted felons. It was an extraordinary experience. Very, very meaningful. So thank you all. Thank you, Yuan and Kai, for getting up in the middle of the night. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you, Aida, since you don't like technical anything, and you're here. So I could count on my friend. I needed a sexual 6. All right. Thank you all. And then keep the feedback coming on the test. I love it. I take everything you say into consideration. And you'd be amazed that if you tell me something good or bad, I want the bad too, I listen to it, and then I compare and contrast it to other people that have said the same thing. So don't feel anything you'd say would be too petty or negative. I love it, because it doesn't mean I can change that particular thing you suggest, but I want to know what it is. And I'm trying very, very hard now to help the 6s that type as 6s and have all the markers feel comfortable exploring 6. So if there's anything you can recommend to me, I'm going to consider implementing it. All right. Thank you so much. And I will see you next month or whenever.
Thanks, Catherine.
Okay. Bye-bye.